Hello everyone, my name is Bruce Baer, Dean of the College of Forest Resources at the University of Washington. On behalf of the college, I wish to welcome all of you to this three-part centennial lecture series entitled Sustaining Our Northwest World, Creating Futures Since 1907. Our intent in this series is to highlight the dynamic balance required to meet the growing natural resource needs of society while sustaining the environmental, economic, and cultural values we associate with our region's urban and wildland resources. This year marks the 100th year since our college was established. We are very proud of our long and illustrious tradition and the great successes achieved by the men and women graduates of our college. We are also very proud of our faculty and staff, whose research productivity, I might add, recently resulted in our college being recognized as the #1 public forestry program in America. In recognition of our centennial year, we wish to present 3 lectures. Our first lecture will focus on a historical perspective by describing the changing context for conservation, forest practices, and education in the United States. The second lecture will focus on the challenges we currently face for creating a sustainable future for natural resources in our state. And our third lecture will speculate on what the future may hold for the natural resources of our region. We hope that these 3 lectures provide a well-rounded appreciation of how our college has contributed to a better understanding of natural resources over the past century and how we intend to continue to play a significant role in the 21st century and into the 22nd. This lecture series is a companion to the college's Denman Forestry Issues series, also seen on UWTV. And both series contribute to the college's vision of world-class leadership in sustaining natural resources and environmental services throughout the region and beyond in order to improve the lives of future generations while satisfying the needs of people today. We are pleased to present this lecture series in partnership with the University of Washington Alumni Association. We are also grateful for the support of the Rachel A. Woods Endowment, which is underwriting a portion of this series, and to members of the college's Dean's Club for their financial support. Our lecture today will be presented by Doug Sutherland, the 12th Commissioner of Public Lands since statehood in 1889. Doug has enjoyed a long and productive career as a public servant. Prior to assuming his current position as the Commissioner of Public Lands in 2001, Doug served as Pierce County Executive, where he was a regional leader on transportation, economic development, salmon recovery, and other key issues. He served as City Manager for the City of SeaTac, Washington, Mayor of the City of Tacoma, and he served as a member of the City of Tacoma City Council. Among his many achievements in Tacoma, he tackled important environmental issues such as working to clean Tacoma's air and bringing all parties together to craft a solution when Commencement Bay in Tacoma was named as a Superfund cleanup site. He was also involved in the restoration of downtown Tacoma. Doug was born in Helena, Montana, and grew up in Spokane, Washington. He attended Central Washington University in Ellensburg, graduating in 1959 with a BA in History. In October 2001, Central Washington University honored Doug with the Distinguished Alumni Award for College of Arts and Humanities. Now, I am very pleased to introduce the Honorable Doug Sutherland, speaking on Creating a Sustainable Future for Washington's Public Lands, a view from the Commissioner of Public Lands.
Bruce, thank you very much. First of all, let me congratulate the College of Forestry for its 100 years. That's just about a rotation and a half of forestry. And you have many of your forestry graduates here tonight, and I'm delighted to see as many of you here. Thank you for coming tonight and giving us an opportunity to talk a little bit about the natural resources of the state of Washington and where are we. There's three series of these lectures, one talking about the history, one talking about the current status, and that's what I'm trying to do tonight. And later on, Bruce Bear is going to come and tie all of this together as what is the future entail for us in the field of natural resources, and I imagine looking more specifically at forestry. Listening to you go through all that stuff, Bruce, you know, actually I was just a kid from the north end of Spokane and never had any real sense of where I was going until I got there. And I have had nothing but fun my whole life, and as Commissioner of Public Lands, this is by far the most exciting and the most fun place to be if you're going to be providing services to the people of the state. And indeed, every day I come home, well, almost every day, come home and say, yes, I really have been able to provide some kind of benefit to the people. And that's such a rewarding feeling and capability to do. February is a very historic month. In February of 1889 is when Congress passed the Enabling Act, creating the state of Washington. In February of 1974, the Forest Practices Act was signed into law by Governor Dan Evans. In February of 1987, Timber, Fish, and Wildlife Agreement was signed by the stakeholders and partners. Today, February 22nd, as an aside, is my little sister's birthday. And so it is really indeed a very special day today. Now, tonight we're going to discuss the importance of these events, except my little sister's birthday. We're going to talk about why is this important to the people of the state of Washington. And these issues, these deal with our sustainable future that Bruce is going to be talking about. All of these provide the underpinnings of what's really important in our natural resources. Most of you have been very involved in the School of Forestry, very involved in natural resources as it relates to trees. I'm going to be talking tonight, focusing first of all and primarily on the Department of Natural Resources and the different kinds of things that we do. And why is that different than just trees? Now, not to say anything, trees are lovely. I love them. They generate a lot of revenues and create an enormous number of jobs. We're going to be talking tonight how rich the diversity of the state is, how we are working in working landscapes, and what is that really relevant to the future for environmental, economic, and social benefits. We're going to be talking about why clean air, clean water, wildlife and fish habitat, jobs, the viability of natural resource industries, and public access for recreation. Why is that so important? Washington's resources are rich and diverse. Forest resources, agricultural resources, and aquatic resources. In the state of Washington, there are 21 million acres of forested lands, including 8 million acres of privately owned lands. 4 of those are industrial commercial, 4 million of those are small forest landowners. 13 million acres of federal forest lands are and tribal and state forests. And so out of half of the size of the state, forestry is a very key part of what we are and what we do. It's the second largest manufacturing sector in the state, behind transportation and aircraft. It represents 10% of the United States' total private establishments and employment, and 13% of the total softwood production in the United States. In addition, plywood coming from the forests of the state of Washington equals about 7% of the total U.S. production. Agriculture. Agriculture is Washington's #1 employer. Top commodities in the field of agriculture include apples, milk, cattle, potatoes, wheat, hay, and cherries. And the Department of Natural Resources are involved in each and every one of those, along with many in the private sector. Farmers and ranchers produce over $6 billion a year in crops and livestock. Food and agricultural businesses contribute 12% of the state's economy and employs over 160,000 people. So agriculture and timber together, huge part of who we are and what we do, and it's been that way for over 100 years. In addition to that, aquatic resources, shellfish, oysters, clams, geoducks, scallops, and mussels. Washington State leads the United States in farmed bivalve shellfish production, estimated at somewhere between $95 and $100 million a year in sales. 88.5 million pounds. That's about 80% of the West Coast production as quoted in 2005 statisticians. At DNR, we envision a future which our human and natural environment provides abundant and diverse social, ecological, and economic benefits for all of the people of the state. And in this, all future generations, acting to ensure this vision, we achieve sustainability not only for the last 100 years, but also in perpetuity in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, this is DNR's vision statement. This vision of the future actually begins today. And it provides the foundation of our management of lands for the people of Washington, as well as regulatory, incentive, and fire protection programs. State trust lands, they were all granted to the state at statehood. 3 million of land granted at statehood in perpetuity for purposes of generating revenues, to support public education and facilities, common schools K through 12, all of the universities of the state, as well as the institutions and capitol buildings. In the 1920s and the 1930s, the legislature added another 685,000 acres of forest lands that were foreclosed as a result of non-payment of property taxes. These properties, these lands generate revenues for public schools, supported state colleges and universities, capital campus buildings, as well as prisons and other state institutions. The 600,000 acres of forest lands that were added by the legislature are in 20 counties scattered around the state. In the year 2006, those county lands alone generated $73 million to fund local services in each of those counties as libraries, fire districts, and hospitals received funding and benefits from these lands. These lands are now called state forest lands. And oh, by the way, about $15 million of revenues also flowed to the state's general fund. So it's not just local districts that benefited from these managed lands. Now, this map is a map that we in DNR use a lot. This shows the sections that were granted to the state at statehood. Now, if you were to look out here in the eastern part of the state, you'll see Section 16 and Section 36. All of the states, beginning with the state of Ohio in 1806, received the 16th and 36th section of those townships that had not already been committed to other purposes. And so in the state of Washington, we received a little over 3 million acres with the idea to sell it, to generate the revenues, to start building schools and institutions. Those sections were determined by the writers of our state's constitution not to be sold in rapid order like many of the other western states. As you look at what we have left, we have actually, for the state's size, more trust lands left in management today than any of the other western states. Now, mind you that the state of Washington, is the smallest of all of the states west of the Mississippi River except Hawaii. I was over in Hawaii, and I said that once, and a lady got up and berated me, not realizing that, yes, indeed, Hawaii is smaller than the state of Washington. But the state of Washington is also bigger than any state east of the Mississippi River. So as you look at what we have received here is, on a percentage basis, we were able to retain more of these lands than any of the other western states. Aquatic lands. This is really interesting. The state was granted the uplands in trust with a fiduciary responsibility. We were also given the opportunity to accept the ownership of all of the aquatic bedlands. This is the lands of the state that are always covered by water. All of Puget Sound, all of the navigable rivers, and the natural lakes, 20 acres of size and larger. Now, these bedlands, along with about 20% of the tidelands and beaches of the state, still are retained in public ownership, managed by the department. In the year 2006, $19.5 million were earned from shellfish harvesting, from aquatic leases, and other activities. These monies, after paying for the operation of the department, the aquatics portion of the department, these monies are used for a variety of different kinds of grant programs that encourage people's use of the aquatic and access to these aquatic facilities that we have all across the state. So if you're over at the city of Tacoma and you're walking along the Les Davis Pier, the fishing pier, that was built by funds generated through these aquatic lands. So that we support public access and habitat restoration, as well as having significant improvements for access. The Aquatic Revenue Generation Program comes from leases of marinas and marine activities, leasing along the waterfronts, from geoduck harvesting, shellfish farming, and a couple of examples. Those of you here are very familiar with the Seattle waterfront. Pier 55 and 56 on the Seattle waterfront, where Elias Restaurant is located, is one of our lessees, and it generates revenues that goes into the aquatics fund. An interesting lease that we have is with the Red Lion Hotel in Vancouver, Washington. Those of you who have been there and have gone into the restaurant probably don't realize that half of the restaurant is located on aquatic bedlands. And so we lease half of the restaurant to the hotel in order for them to be able to encourage people to enjoy a view of the river right there at the bridge going over to the state of Oregon. The Columbia River indeed is one of the aquatic bedlands, and 50% of the river we manage, 50% of the river the state of Oregon does. And sometimes it gets to be kind of interesting having conversations when their ideas are a little different than ours. Geoduck is one of our primary fund generators. Geoduck are sold primarily to Asian countries. Mature geoduck today range in weight from about 1.5 to 16 pounds and about 2.5 pounds on the average. These geoduck generate about $8 to $9 a pound. In the marketplace, they generate somewhere around $30 to $40 a pound. It's a very valuable resource. What we do is that we use these funds to be able to do a variety of different kinds of activities in addition to public access. It supports habitat restoration projects, for an example. One of the examples at Myrtle Edwards Park, we removed a lot of the big concrete blocks that were down there. We also have been working with the Department of Ecology in removing a lot of creosote pilings up and down Puget Sound. We were just up in Bellingham Bay, in the city of Bellingham, removing a whole long list of creosoted pilings from there. What we try to do is to be able to create better plant vegetation along the bedlands, as well as to recreate salt marshes and tide pools for salmon habitat and enhancements. These are the first places that salmonid and fingerling exist as they try to find their ways to the salt waters of Puget Sound and the Pacific Ocean. We also have what we call aquatic reserves. These protect an environmentally sensitive areas around the San Juan Islands, Maury Island, Cherry Point in the Bellingham area, as well as Fidalgo Bay near Anacortes. And the idea is to be able to identify those very sensitive areas where you do not want activities such as industrial or other uses. In our attempt to continue environmental cleanups, we have a program called the Derelict Vessel Program. A lot of times people will have a boat, and the best time for anybody is the day that they buy the boat. The second best time is the day that they sell the boat. But sometimes they don't sell the boat. Sometimes it deteriorates to a point where it just sinks and lands on the bedlands of the state. And that derelict vessel is a hazard to navigation. It's a hazard to the environment, and it generally is not a well-placed piece of equipment. So about 3 years ago, 2003, we began a program to remove these vessels, and so far we've moved over 200 either sunk or partially sunk watercraft, about 50 of them by ourselves, the Department of Natural Resources, and we work with other public agencies to be able to remove them. And if we can find the owner of the vessel, we try to secure funding from that owner to be responsible for the removal of that vessel. We work a lot on contaminated sites. As Bruce had indicated, one of my very first opportunities to get involved is in the city of Tacoma in Commencement Bay, where it was identified as one of the very first places where it was so bad it was designed or designated as one of those Superfund sites. My friend Bill Ruckelshaus called me up on the phone. He says, by the way, Mr. Mayor, tomorrow, expect a press release. We're identifying your Commencement Bay as a Superfund site. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you later. 6 months later, he called up and says, hey, Doug, how would you like to do a public review of the plant in Ruston called Asarco and what impact arsenic has on public health? And so, gee, thanks, Bill. You've given me, too, some of the most serious problems that even today we continue to work on. Contaminated sediments have been removed from Superfund sites and contaminated bedlands such as Elliott Bay, Bellingham Bay, Commencement Bay, Eagle Harbor, and Foss Waterway in Tacoma. Over this last summer, we've been working real hard with a whole bunch of folks on the Puget Sound Partnerships, and legislation before the legislature today is trying to figure out how do we create an entity, a grouping of responsible jurisdictions, state, federal, and local, along with a whole bunch of volunteers trying to figure out how do we clean up Puget Sound. As you look at all of these lands today, there's a variety of things that we generate that gives us benefit in addition to just money. But on the economic side, we average about $250 million a year in non-tax revenue that goes to these trusts. Now, that's even after paying for the cost of the department's operations. These are dollars that are non-tax revenues. These are monies that we generate through the operation of these business activities. And if you do a 2 to 2.5 to 3 swing dollar for dollar. That means $500 to $750 million of indirect annual economic benefits and jobs to the state, as well as impacts on local economies. If you were to compare the Department of Natural Resources to the private sector, and recently we did take a look at CEO Magazine's listing of all of the private sector businesses in the state, and if we compared the size of the business that we generate year in and year out, we would be ranked number 33 as the 33rd largest business in the state of Washington. And if you look at the value of the lands that we manage, we estimate that it's somewhere between $8 and $10 billion. So, okay, what do we do with all of these monies that we generate? And what I have here is a chart that talks about the monies that were generated in the year 2006. Total revenue, $341 million. You see down here at the bottom. The schools, public schools, received a little over $75 million. Universities and colleges, around $17 million. Capitol buildings, $7 million. Prisons and state, interestingly enough, $15 million went to the general fund. $11 million came out of the Aquatic Enhancement Account. County governments received almost $73 million. Our management activities, we spent about $100 million. So as you look at all of these different revenues, where they came and where the monies go to as a result of these generation of funds, this is where they are. I put down here on the bottom of this chart just because I found it really, really interesting. People say that when you take dollars and acquire lands that you lease, you're taking them off the property tax rolls, and local jurisdictions do not receive the benefit of having those public lands on the tax rolls. Wrong. We paid $2.67000, $2,670,000 in property taxes. This was for the year 2006. We are required by law that any lease that we have, that the leasehold tax be applicable to that lease. And so the people do not lose the fact revenues from properties just because it's on public ownership. So where are these funds generally generated from? As you can see on this chart, the vast majority of it comes from our management of forest lands all across the state. Next comes aquatics, then commercial properties, and then finally agricultural lands, giving us that total separation. And basically, commercial properties have been increasing over the years. We began acquisition of commercial properties in urban areas as those lands, rather than being developable for forestry or agriculture, becomes part of the urban centers. We try to work with developers to develop those commercial lands, and we have an increasing revenue stream year in and year out, taking properties that otherwise would not be generating any revenue and putting them into commercial activities. New revenue and energy sources. You see at the top of this chart a large pole. That's actually a wind tower. We have 69 wind towers on DNR lands on 10 different leases. We have another 16 leases under negotiation in which we anticipate an additional 100 to 150 towers. So as we look at the lands where they're in significant constant wind power opportunities, we do lease the land, and we also take a portion of the monies generating as a result of generating electricity. Of the total value, we generally take about 8%. In the middle picture there, this is one of my favorite things. Those of you who really enjoy a fine glass of wine, 20% of the wine in the state of Washington today is produced on lands managed by and leased to farmers on DNR or trust lands. 20% of the wines today come from trust lands. So if you like to build schools, drink Washington wines. We're also looking at ways to be able to increase the amount of, in a new adventure, as well as a new financial venture, leasing lands on our shorelands for the aquaculture of geoduck farming. We lease these lands and we monitor the work that the lessees do on these lands, making sure that our environmental activities and the year utilization of growing geoduck and harvesting geoduck, that we know as much about that as we possibly can. We're leasing over the next 5 years about 250 acres of lands, and each of the lessees are required to do certain scientific analysis to make sure that what's happening in this new field of aquaculture for geoduck is not detrimental to the beaches and the sands and the shores of the shorelands of the state. In addition to the economic value of these lands today, there's also a significant social benefit that we receive. Clean water. As we have different kinds of polls and information coming from the public, one of the very first things that people prefer to see is clean water. And if clean air, clean water, and good food, that is our survival. And what we do on these lands is to generate that clean water through healthy watersheds. We also generate a significant amount of habitat for wildlife and fish. Salmon, northern spotted owls, marbled murrelets, Canadian lynx, all different kinds of deer, elk, and other recreational kinds of and wildlife that are important to how we are as a society. In addition, the state trust lands, conservation lands are set aside. Those lands that we have taken out of active production and put them into either conservation areas or preservation areas. Those lands that you really can't use for commercial forestry purposes. So if you can't use them for that, let's set them aside and use them for other purposes. We do this to protect outstanding examples of our state's natural diversity. It represents some of the best remaining examples of native ecosystems in state ownership. And we protect the ecological and environmental features unique to each of the regions around the state. It also offers significant educational and research opportunities, functioning as outdoor classrooms and recreational opportunities. Mount Si and Rattlesnake Ridge are two areas here nearby in the Snoqualmie Valley that are conservation areas. And many of you, I'm sure, have hiked the ridges and the trails on Mount Si and Rattlesnake Ridge. Down in Thurston County, it's the Mima Mounds, which are some of the most unique formations of lands here in the state of Washington. Public access for recreation. We were able, through the legislative direction, to have multiple purpose uses for these lands. And as a result of that, we have somewhere between 9 and 12 million visitors a year to these various lands. Most of them are relatively remote. Trails, bicycle trails, and what you see here, some camping opportunities. We have 143 campsites scattered all across the state. Remote, no running water, no electricity, pit toilets. So they are not the first used, but certainly these campsites are sometimes considered by many to be the most desirable places to visit. In the middle you see two things here, horsemen and bicyclists. These are two of the major groups that utilize our lands all across the state. And finally, down in the lowest photo there, although that shows bicyclists there in that photo, let me assure you that the growth of non-motorized vehicles are one thing, but motorized vehicles, ATVs, RVs, all of those kinds of recreational toys that people enjoy today, three-wheelers, quads, four-wheelers, they're great recreational opportunities, and people truly love to go out and tear up the woods. We try to keep them within the bounds of using these recreational lands in a reasonable and responsible way. We also are responsible for the safeguarding the present and future resources. Regulatory programs keep our natural resource industries viable while protecting these public resources. The Forest Practices Act, Surface Mining Act, making sure that the logging and road construction and brush control and fertilization and other activities in forestry are done in a reasonable and responsible way. We work a lot with the landowners and loggers to make sure that their operations don't damage and impact water quality, fish, wildlife, and yet still maintaining a viable timber industry here in the state. Rules for forest practices are promulgated by and established by a 12-member Forest Practices Board staffed by the Department of Natural Resources. By law, by statute, I'm the chair of the board. However, Vicki Christensen, alum of the University of Washington School of Forestry and currently identified as the state forester, is responsible for maintaining the regulatory programs and the Forest Practices Act. In addition to that, we're also responsible for surface and mining reclamation, oil and gas drilling, as well as finding places where they can actually drill and store underground gas, natural gas, so that it can be used when it's needed. So rather than building storage above the ground, we build a lot of storage below the ground. These are managed by the Department of Natural Resources Geology Division, which also provides a lot of the geologic maps that are necessary for cities and counties to identify where are hazards, geologic hazards in their jurisdiction. That way they can figure out where not to build because it's a slide area, where to be aware of hazard zones where we have experienced significant number of earthquakes, and what does that do? Interestingly enough, we're not very far from a major fault right here at the University of Washington. The Department of Natural Resources is also the state's largest on-call fire department. Last year, over 460,000 acres of forest lands were subject to wildfire. This is on federal lands, state lands, and private lands. We protect about 12.7 million acres of forest lands all across the state. State, private, and tribal, as tribes do have large forested areas. And when asked, we respond and help them fight fire on their lands. We have about 1,200 employees in the summertime assigned to wildfire protection. And we work collaboratively with state, federal, and local agencies and fire districts responding quickly to fires. Our objective is to keep fires 10 acres and smaller. Once it gets beyond 10 acres, the cost of that fire and the amount of resources necessary to suppress that fire gets significant. Last summer, we dropped from our percentage of success. We dropped all the way down to 95%. Of the fires that were reported to the Department of Natural Resources were kept under 10 acres. In 2005, it was 96%. We felt very bad that we dropped. Our intent and our objective is to keep it as close to 95, 96, 97% of the fires. However, Even at that, the 462,000 acres that we burnt, or that were burnt last year, cost taxpayers, state, federal, and local, $165 million. So we believe that we really need to figure out better ways to be able to educate the public on the dangers and the hazards of wildfire, and for us to be more and more cognizant of the impacts of fire all across our state. And as you can see here on this slide, this can be a very scary circumstance. The future of Washington forests, we look very carefully, looking at not only what we do on state lands, looking at 70 to 100 years in the future, trying to figure out what is the very best management programs that balance the ecological, economic, and social circles that are necessary for pure forestry activities. In addition to that, we work very closely with the University of Washington, looking at forest project policy recommendations in the future of Washington forests. We're currently nearly ready to publish a report to the legislature on the state's timber supply, the competitive position in state and global markets, our economic contribution of forestry to the state, as well as the concerns that we have in converting forest lands to other purposes as the value of the land continues to increase and become very dynamic, where the value of the land is greater than the lands producing commercial forests. And how do we maintain that active position of generating timber on a recycling on a constant basis? The recommendations that we are submitting to the legislature are based on the university's findings, along with our own staff working with them, aimed at protecting the working land forest base. We include long-term permits for small forest landowners to prevent conversion from forestry to other purposes. We also look at very closely at forest health activities, and I'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. The importance of maintaining this industry, not only is the forest important, but also all of the infrastructure that supports it. We recently had a very interesting sale of stumpage down in the area nearby St. Helens. There were very large trees. There were very tall trees, well over 200 feet. And some of them 36 to 40 inches at breast height. Big trees, very straight trees, very valuable resource. They had to go to Oregon to find fallers who had the skills and abilities to fall these great big trees without breaking them as the tree fell to the ground after being cut. This question of the ability to be able to maintain a working infrastructure is very important. Our landscape management approaches to sustainable forestry is one way to protect these forest lands from conversion. Last summer, the governor and I signed the Forest Practices Habitat Conservation Plan. It's a 50-year agreement with federal governments recognizing the forest and fish rules that meet the requirements of the Endangered Species Act. So now we have both on state lands and all across the state, private lands, recognition of the importance of the Endangered Species Act and our ability to be able to respond to that. This forest habitat conservation plan protects 60,000 miles of streams and over 9.5 million acres of timberland all across the state of Washington. These state forest lands are managed in such a way, environmentally and socially, that we now have the ability to claim that they are indeed certified as green forests. With the state applying in 2005 for SFI certification. The west side of the state was certified. In 2006, Eastern Washington was certified. And we're currently exploring ways to be able to have a statewide certification for all forest lands all across the state. Here's one of the serious issues that we're going to be facing. This is a map that shows lands across the state and where the population centers are. As you look at this, the population areas are in red. And if you were to look at this map 20 years ago, you would be amazed at the difference between what was other uses and what are now those areas of significant population. And as you can see, they are immediately adjacent to forest lands all across the state. And as we look to the future, we are going to be looking at, in the next 15 or 20 years, another 1.5 to 2 billion people. And most of them are going to be living in the Puget Sound area. And as you can see in the Tri-Cities area, in the Vancouver and the Spokane areas, all of these are areas where we have significant forestry activities. How are we going to be able to accept this significant additional number of people to the state of Washington and still maintain agriculture, maintain forestry, maintain aquatic resources that we look to today to generate significant revenues to us? It's one of the issues that we need to work with. And these are some of the things that we're looking at. We're looking at the blocking up of lands. Instead of having the checkerboard land ownership, we're bringing them together into larger, more manageable areas. We're looking at diversifying and to be able to expand and look at a variety of different ownerships and the way that we manage them. And we do this through purchases, we do this through auctions, and we do this through exchanges. We need to improve the health of Washington forests. As you can see this photograph here, that is not a healthy stand of trees. And all across the eastern part of the state, looking up the Canadian provinces of Alberta and British Columbia, large areas are significantly impacted by a variety of different kinds of forest diseases and bugs. We really need to do some significant work on this. At the same time, we can take advantage of some of the changes in biofuels and the use of these kinds of materials to generate ethanol and other fuels that are needed as we look at different ways to provide transportation fuels. How do we look at addressing the climate change? Well, I showed you some photos of the wind power, and we're expanding that, looking to different ways to do that. We're exploring the forest-based carbon credit program. We're encouraging the development of wood-based fuels. We're encouraging the direct seed in our farming methods in which farmers no longer till the soils, but they leave the materials there to be able to provide biological improvements. We're exploring tidal and wave energy. There was a bill today discussed in the legislature as to whether or not this makes good sense. I think it does. Sustainable forest management and forest health things, we need to be able to look at carbon and how we can increase carbon storage and reduce the amount of carbon emissions. Forestry is a great place to be able to do that. And we do this through the process of collaboration in developing really good partnerships. We do this through the availability of really good science, and this is where the University of Washington comes to play a lot, because the really good science is necessary, and here at the School of Forestry, we receive a great deal of that. And we continue to work in partnership with the university. So here we are, a whole bunch of stuff that we're doing. We have a lot of issues in front of us. We've got a lot of things that we need to do. As I said very early on in the program, the future starts today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I really appreciate your attention.
Thank you very much, Doug.
You
for
bet.
that very well presented and very informative talk. Now, this is your chance to ask the commissioner some questions. I'm just up here to kind of shield him a little bit, but he has to answer them. So, okay. So if you have a question, we have microphones. Here's one. Wait a second, we'll bring you a mic.
Thank you. I'm a little bit of a newbie to your area, so excuse me if this is a very basic question, but you were talking a lot about one of the aspects of your mandate, which is preserving the social value of the lands. And I'm wondering how, when you talked about many of the mandates you have, it seems that a lot of them can be very problematic in terms of balancing. And I'm just wondering, how do you incorporate social values, the non-monetized values, basically into the decision-making process?
Boy, this lady goes, she may be a newbie, so to speak, but she goes right to the heart of some of the difficulties that we have. The idea of trust lands was to be able to generate revenues, and they are a fiduciary trust, which means that we have absolute loyalty to that trust, ignoring all other things. That's the basic principle. The problem is that in today's world, that is not reality. We also have other federal laws. We have a lot of people who enjoy these lands, and as a result of the Multi-Purpose Act, we're responsible to allow people access for recreation, for hunting. Tribal organizations wish to do cultural activities, hunting and gathering, doing traditional kinds of activities that they have done for centuries. And so you're right. How do you balance all of that and still meet the primary fiduciary trust responsibility? We spend a lot of time developing 10-year programs, as we're required to do by state law. These 10-year programs take into account all of those other kinds of activities and still determine how much can we actively manage in the forest and still maintain that forest sustainably over long periods of time, in perpetuity, and still give people the opportunity to recreate and to enjoy those other social activities. Now, social activities are also dependent upon jobs. Social activities are also dependent upon other infrastructure supports of those jobs. And so as you look at all of these, you try to find ways to make sure that you have that balance. How do you provide public access? And when do you provide public access? And still maintain the vitality of the forest, maintain the vitality of agricultural lands. And so we spend a lot of time as the Board of Natural Resources making these policy decisions. We seek a lot of public input. And we go through an environmental review process for every activity that we do. So it's very complex. It's very involved. And we spend an awful lot of time in public meetings and hearings to make sure that indeed we do consider all of those other aspects. And state law says that you must have a forest practices process. Federal law says you must recognize the Endangered Species Act as well as the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. So all of these play together, and you try to find what is the balance and still maintain that fiduciary trust responsibility. That's why this job's so fun. Bruce,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you again, Doug, for your lecture.